At 57, Ralph Tresvant reveals the dark truth of New Edition and Bobby Brown. They were the golden boys of R&B 5 kids from Boston who turned Candy Girl into a worldwide sensation. But behind the fame, luxury, and flashing lights hid a truth so dark it nearly destroyed them all. At 57, Ralph Tresvant finally breaks his silence, exposing the lies, greed, and betrayals that tore New Edition apart from the inside. From stolen millions to on-stage brawls and gunfire, this is the story the music industry never wanted you to hear. Are you ready for the truth behind the Brotherhood? Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more shocking revelations. Ralph Tresvant, the betrayed voice of New Edition. At 57, Ralph Tresvant has become something far deeper than a soft-voiced crooner from Boston. He's a living testimony to how fame, friendship, and betrayal can shape a man's entire life. As the original frontman of New Edition, Ralph was the group's emotional anchor, the one whose honey-smooth vocals turned Cool It Now and Can You Stand the Rain into timeless R&B classics. But behind the adoration and polished harmonies lay a darkness that haunted him for decades. A system that used 5 young boys, drained their worth, and left scars no gold record could heal. Born in 1968 in Roxbury, Massachusetts, Ralph grew up in a neighborhood where music was an escape from poverty and violence. When he and childhood friends Bobby Brown, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, and Ronnie DeVoe formed New Edition, they thought they were chasing dreams. What they didn't realize was that the industry saw them as products, not people. At just 15, Ralph watched as his signature voice powered a platinum-selling single, Candy Girl, while his pockets stayed empty. After a grueling nationwide tour in 1983, each boy received a check for $1.87, a cruel joke that revealed how their contracts had been designed to exploit them. The betrayal by producer Maurice Starr, who pocketed most of their earnings through recoupable expenses, would be Ralph's first painful lesson in how the music business chews up young black talent. But the real heartbreak came later from within the group itself. As fame grew, egos clashed. Bobby Brown's descent into addiction turned every performance into a gamble. Tresvant often found himself mediating fights, covering for Bobby's absences, and shielding the group's image while watching his friend self-destruct. During the infamous 1996 Home Again tour, Ralph witnessed chaos on stage. Brown extending his solos, DeVoe trying to pull him off, and a physical fight erupting before a stunned crowd. Moments later, gunshots echoed backstage. For Ralph, that night symbolized the death of their brotherhood. In the years that followed, more wounds opened. Without his knowledge, management added Johnny Gill to replace Brown in 1987, blindsiding Tresvant and forcing him to sing beside someone he hadn't even agreed to include. Although Gill's voice brought power to Heartbreak, a multi-platinum success, Ralph never forgot how it happened behind his back. Later, internal politics worsened when Gill gained control of the New Edition trademark, and even more painfully when the group reformed as RBRM, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike, erasing Ralph entirely from promotional photos. Now older and introspective, Tresvant has learned to separate loyalty from illusion. In interviews, he admits that the so-called brotherhood was really a business built on contracts, not compassion. He has since channeled the pain into purpose, mentoring younger artists and warning them to own their publishing, understand their contracts, and never confuse success with security. Through heartbreak lawsuits and decades of public humiliation, Ralph Tresvant's voice has never lost its grace. His revelation at 57 isn't bitterness, it's survival. After all the chaos, he remains the one constant thread in New Edition's tangled history, the quiet heart of a group that forgot how to love itself. Bobby Brown. Addiction and betrayal. Bobby Brown's life has been a brutal collision between talent, temptation, and tragedy, a living embodiment of how addiction can twist brotherhood into betrayal. When Ralph Tresvant at 57 revealed the dark truth behind New Edition, much of that darkness revolved around Bobby himself. He wasn't just the group's wild card, He became the fault line that split their foundation. In the early 1980s, Bobby was the heartbeat of New Edition, loud, confident, and hungry for stardom. Fans adored his fearless energy, the same spark that made Candy Girl a breakout hit. Yet behind that charm was a deep resentment. After selling out a national tour, Bobby and his bandmates returned home to Boston with checks for just $1.87. Their so-called trust funds had vanished, stolen by manipulative contracts under Maurice Starr. For Bobby, that betrayal planted the first seed of rebellion, a lifelong distrust of authority, and a burning anger that would eventually consume him. When his solo career exploded with Don't Be Cruel in 1988, selling over 7 million copies, it seemed Bobby had escaped the group's curse. But fame only magnified his demons. Cocaine and alcohol turned triumph into torment. By the mid-1990s, addiction ruled every part of his life. During the Home Again tour, 1996, Bobby's drug use spiraled out of control, showing up late to shows, hijacking sets, and clashing violently with Ronnie DeVoe on stage. The chaos reached a breaking point when gunshots rang out backstage, sending fans into panic. That night became the moment New Edition's brotherhood officially died. Bobby's betrayal wasn't just of his friends, it was of himself. He turned away from those who tried to save him, including Ralph Tresvant, who spent years covering for his erratic behavior. Instead, Bobby surrounded himself with enablers who fed his ego and dulled his pain. Later, when he rejoined the group as part of RBRM, he fueled new bitterness by cropping Ralph out of their promotional photos, erasing the man who had once defended him. Even as tragedy struck, losing his ex-wife Whitney Houston in 2012 and daughter Bobby Christina in 2015, Bobby's story remained one of painful contradiction, the man who sang about love, yet lost nearly everyone who loved him. For Ralph Tresvant, Bobby's downfall wasn't just sad, it was symbolic. It exposed how fame and addiction destroy trust, twist loyalty, and turn brotherhood into survival. In his words, "We were never brothers, just broken men trying to hold on." Johnny Gill, the outsider's impact. Johnny Gill's arrival in New Edition changed everything musically, emotionally, and politically. When Ralph Tresvant, at 57, revealed the dark truth behind the group, he admitted that one of the deepest cuts came from the moment he realized Johnny had joined without his knowledge. What was meant to stabilize the group after Bobby Brown's departure, instead, ignited a quiet storm of mistrust and resentment that would haunt New Edition for decades. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1966, Johnny Gill was already a rising R&B powerhouse before joining the Boston-born group. He had released 2 solo albums by the time producers Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis recruited him in 1987 to bring maturity and vocal depth to Heartbreak, an album that would sell over 2 million copies and redefine New Edition's sound. But the way he was brought in secretly while Ralph was being considered for a solo deal felt like betrayal. Ralph walked into the Minneapolis studio expecting to record with his brothers, and instead found a new replacement already standing in front of the mic. For Johnny, the transition wasn't easy either. He entered a tight-knit brotherhood forged in Boston's Orchard Park projects, where shared struggle had built a lifelong bond. To them, he was the outsider, talented but unfamiliar, a Washington native dropped into a family that had grown up together in poverty and fame. Even though Heartbreak produced classics like Can You Stand the Rain and If It Isn't Love, tension simmered beneath the success. Johnny's powerhouse vocals elevated the group musically, but emotionally, his presence exposed cracks that had long been hidden. The irony was painful. Johnny Gill helped save New Edition's career while deepening its divisions. Fans loved his voice, but inside the group, silent rivalries grew. Bobby Brown later admitted he had felt jealous of Johnny's talent while Ralph struggled with feeling replaced. Still, Johnny refused to be defined by resentment. He brought discipline to rehearsals, pushed the group toward professionalism, and reminded them that musical excellence could outlive drama. Years later, however, Johnny's name reappeared in controversy when it was revealed he had briefly controlled the trademark for New Edition, locking out some original members. Though he claimed it was a legal misunderstanding, the move reopened old wounds and reinforced his image as the outsider who somehow held the keys to the family home. For Ralph Tresvant, Johnny represented both gratitude and grief. The man who gave the group its most mature sound, but also symbolized a turning point where friendship and business collided. Still, even amid past tensions, Ralph has acknowledged Johnny's importance, calling him the voice that kept us alive. Johnny Gill's impact on New Edition is undeniable. He elevated their artistry while exposing the emotional fractures beneath their polished harmonies. His story proves that sometimes the person who saves the dream also becomes the reminder of what was lost. Ronnie DeVoe. Conflict on stage. Among the 6 men who built New Edition, Ronnie DeVoe often stood as the quiet stabilizer, the one who stayed out of headlines, balanced egos, and kept the rhythm tight. But when Ralph Tresvant at 57 finally exposed the dark truth behind the group, even Ronnie's steady presence couldn't hide the chaos that erupted when loyalty collided with addiction. The breaking point came not behind closed doors, but under the blinding lights of the 1996 Home Again tour, where brotherhood turned violent in front of thousands. Born in 1967 in Roxbury, Massachusetts, Ronnie joined New Edition as the final member brought in by his uncle Brooke Payne, the group's choreographer and manager. Unlike Bobby Brown's fiery confidence or Ralph Tresvant's soft charm, Ronnie was methodical and disciplined. A dancer more than a singer, the one who made sure the group looked like one heartbeat on stage. But as fame grew, so did the fractures. Behind every smile in photos lay exhaustion, jealousy, and years of financial exploitation. The $1.87 checks, the missing trust funds, and the endless recoupable expenses had left them all jaded. By the time they reunited for Home Again, wounds from the past were already festering. During one explosive show, Bobby Brown, high and defiant, refused to leave the stage after his solo performance. He stretched his set far beyond rehearsal limits, turning a group concert into a personal showcase. Fans started booing. The band froze. And then Ronnie, tired of chaos, stepped forward. As Ralph recalled, DeVoe tried to pull Bobby off stage not to embarrass him, but to save the show. What followed was chaos. A physical fight between 2 childhood friends, fists flying under the spotlight, backup dancers scattering. Moments later, gunshots rang out backstage, sending the arena into panic. No one was hurt, but the image of unity New Edition had built for years disintegrated instantly. For Ronnie, that night marked a point of no return. The group's image of brotherhood was gone, replaced by fear, shame, and distrust. In interviews, he later admitted that what fans saw as a reunion had become a battlefield filled with entourages, rivalries, and unresolved pain. The tour, intended as a celebration of their legacy, had instead exposed how fame, ego, and addiction had poisoned the bond they once shared in Boston's housing projects. Still, Ronnie's loyalty never faded. When others splintered into solo acts, he, Ricky Bell, and Michael Bivins formed Bell Biv DeVoe, whose 1990 debut, Poison, sold over 4 million copies, proving their independence and professionalism. Yet even amid success, Ronnie kept his humility. Years later, when RBRM, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike formed without Ralph and Johnny, he found himself again at the center of controversy, criticized for participating in another act of exclusion that mirrored the betrayal he once tried to prevent. For Ralph Tresvant, Ronnie remains both the peacemaker and the witness, the man who tried to hold New Edition together even as it fell apart on stage. Ricky Bell, the silent success. While the world remembers Bobby Brown for chaos and Ralph Tresvant for heartbreak, Ricky Bell became the quiet achiever, the man who turned pain into persistence and betrayal into balance. When Ralph at 57 finally revealed the dark truth behind New Edition, Ricky's story emerged as a counterpoint. Not a tale of public meltdowns or scandal, but of quiet endurance amid the group's long descent into dysfunction. Born in Roxbury, Massachusetts in 1967, Ricky Bell was there from the very beginning. He and Ralph grew up singing together in talent shows long before fame called. When Maurice Starr discovered New Edition Ricky's boyish charm and clean vocals, helped Candy Girl reach #1 on the R&B charts in 1983. Yet like his bandmates, he was betrayed early. After months of touring and promotion, the boys returned home with checks for $1.87, each evidence that their so-called trust funds had been stolen through contracts rigged with recoupable expenses. The disappointment hit Ricky hard, but unlike Bobby's rebellion or Ralph's quiet anger, he stayed focused, determined not to let bitterness derail him. As the years went on, Ricky watched his brothers fall apart. Bobby's drug use wrecked the group's stability. Ralph struggled with feeling replaced by Johnny Gill, and internal politics tore friendships apart. Ricky, meanwhile, stayed loyal to the music and to the mission. During the volatile 1996 Home Again tour, he was one of the few who remained level-headed as Bobby Brown and Ronnie DeVoe fought on stage and gunshots rang out backstage. To him, it was proof that success without unity was hollow. "We were on top of the world," he later said, "but we weren't together." Ricky's defining chapter came in 1990 when he joined Michael Bivins and Ronnie DeVoe to form Bell Biv DeVoe BBD. Their debut album, Poison, sold over 4 million copies, creating a fusion of R&B and hip-hop that would shape the sound of the 1990s. The song Poison became a generational anthem, giving Ricky the stardom that had eluded him during New Edition's chaos. Yet even amid triumph, he faced private struggles. Years later, Ricky admitted to battling cocaine addiction, a secret he kept even from his closest friends until it nearly cost him his marriage and career. His honesty about recovery has since turned him into one of the group's most respected survivors. Through all the feuds, betrayals, and fractured reunions, Ricky Bell has remained a symbol of perseverance. He never sought headlines or revenge. He sought peace. When RBRM formed, leaving Ralph and Johnny out, Ricky stayed diplomatic, calling it a chapter, not a replacement. To Ralph Tresvant, he was the glue, the man who never gave up on the idea that music could heal what fame had broken. Today, Ricky stands as the embodiment of endurance in an industry built on exploitation. He may not have shouted the loudest, but his voice, steady and soulful, is the reason New Edition's harmony still exists. Michael Bivins, The Business Divide. If Ralph Tresvant was the heart of New Edition and Bobby Brown its fire, then Michael Bivins was undeniably its brain, the member who turned pain into profit and betrayal into business strategy. Yet, as Ralph revealed at 57, the same sharp instincts that made Bivins a mogul also deepened the cracks that divided the group forever. His story is one of brilliance and boundaries of a boy from Boston's projects who learned how to outsmart an industry that once robbed him blind. Born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1968, Bivins grew up watching the music world exploit young black artists. When New Edition's first national tour ended in humiliation with each member handed a $1.87 paycheck, Michael's innocence died that day. While others vented their anger or numbed their pain, he studied contracts, royalties, and recoupable expenses. He realized that ignorance had cost them everything. Determined never to be fooled again, he shifted from performer to strategist, from dreamer to businessman. As the group splintered in the late 80s, Bobby Brown breaking off into solo superstardom and Johnny Gill stepping in as the powerhouse vocalist, Michael saw opportunity where others saw betrayal. When tensions and egos nearly destroyed New Edition, he and Ricky Bell and Ronnie DeVoe formed Bell Biv DeVoe BBD. Their debut album Poison in 1990 sold over 4 million copies, blending R&B smoothness with streetwise hip-hop grit. The hit single Poison became an anthem, proving that business foresight could succeed where emotional loyalty had failed. But Bivins' ambition didn't stop there. In the 1990s, he founded Biv 10 Records, signing future legends like Boys II Men and Another Bad Creation. Under his guidance, Boys II Men sold over 60 million records worldwide, redefining male R&B harmony for a new era. Bivins had evolved from being a victim of exploitation to a gatekeeper of opportunity, but his success came with consequences. Within New Edition, his growing power blurred the line between partner and competitor. Some members, including Ralph Tresvant and Johnny Gill, resented how Michael's business decisions began to overshadow the group's brotherhood. Deals were made behind closed doors, brand names trademarked without full consensus, and profit splits questioned. By the time the RBRM formation, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike emerged decades later. Many fans saw Bivens' hand in its creation, a savvy move that revived old fame but reignited old wounds. The absence of Ralph and Johnny symbolized not just artistic difference, but the business divide that had followed them since childhood. To Ralph, who valued harmony over hierarchy, Bivens represented the corporate machine they once fought against. To Bivens' business was survival, the only way to ensure that another $1.87 humiliation would never happen again. Despite the controversy, Michael Bivens remains one of the most influential figures in R&B entrepreneurship. His transformation from exploited teenager to music executive embodies both triumph and tragedy, the cost of turning brotherhood into brand management. Maurice Starr, the exploitative manager. Every tragedy has its architect. And in the story that Ralph Tresvant finally exposed at 57, that architect was Maurice Starr, the self-proclaimed general who discovered New Edition, built them into teen idols, and then dismantled their innocence for profit. To fans, Starr was once seen as the genius behind Candy Girl. To the boys themselves, he became the face of betrayal, a man who taught them that the music industry could smile in your face while stealing everything behind your back. Born Larry Johnson in Florida in 1953, Maurice Starr was a talented producer and promoter with a keen ear for marketable black youth energy. In 1982, he found 5 kids from Boston's Orchard Park projects: Ralph Tresvant, Bobby Brown, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivens, and Ronnie DeVoe, and turned them into America's answer to the Jackson 5. His label, Streetwise Records, released Candy Girl, which shot to #1 on the R&B charts and sold over 500,000 copies. Overnight, the boys were national stars, performing on Soul Train and touring across the country. But the dream was a lie. When the tour ended, the group returned home expecting life-changing money. Instead, Starr handed each of them an envelope containing a check for $1.87. Their mothers were promised trust funds and legal protections supervised by the courts. None of it ever materialized. Starr had drafted contracts filled with hidden clauses that shifted every cost: buses, hotels, costumes, food, studio time, and even chaperones onto the boys themselves. These so-called recoupable expenses ensured that the more they worked, the deeper they fell into debt. Starr and the label kept the profits. The kids kept the bills. For Ralph Tresvant, this moment shattered everything. The 5 boys who once sang on the streets of Boston suddenly realized they had been sold into a system designed to exploit them. Their families, unfamiliar with entertainment law, had trusted Starr's promises of wealth and stability. What they got was poverty lawsuits and humiliation. Starr's betrayal didn't just hurt financially, it planted the seeds of division that would haunt New Edition for decades. When the truth emerged, Bobby Brown's fury turned to rebellion. Ralph's faith in management crumbled, and the entire foundation of trust within the group collapsed. Maurice Starr's career didn't end there. After exploiting New Edition, he created New Kids on the Block, a white pop version of the same formula, and this time he got rich. NKOTB's 1988 album, Hangin' Tough, sold over 10 million copies, cementing Starr as a millionaire mogul, while the young black artists he'd built were left to rebuild their lives from scratch. In hindsight, Starr became the embodiment of the industry's racial and economic hypocrisy, a man who saw talent not as art, but as capital. He opened the door for black kids to dream, then locked it behind them. To Ralph Tresvant, Starr's exploitation was the first dark truth proof that the system was never built to protect artists like them. His name remains a warning to every young musician chasing fame in this business. Your first signature could also be your last act of freedom. Anthony B., a tragic loss. In the long, painful history that Ralph Tresvant finally unveiled at 57, one name stands out not as a superstar, but as a victim of the darkness surrounding New Edition: Anthony B. His story isn't one of fame or fortune, but of how proximity to chaos can become deadly. Anthony wasn't a member of the group. He was part of Bobby Brown's entourage, a loyal friend who followed the singer through the highs of success and the depths of addiction. Yet his life ended violently, a chilling reminder of how far the group had drifted from their original dream of music unity and brotherhood. During the 1996 Home Again reunion tour, New Edition had reassembled after years of breakups, lawsuits, and solo pursuits. To the public, it looked like redemption, six brothers reconciling for one final victory lap. But behind the glittering lights was a ticking bomb. Bobby Brown's substance abuse had grown uncontrollable, his entourage swelling with hangers-on who fueled his worst impulses. They weren't there to protect him. They were there to feed the chaos. Money flowed fast, tempers burned hot, and the energy around the tour became increasingly volatile. It was within this atmosphere that tragedy struck. Anthony B., a close associate of Bobby's, became embroiled in a violent altercation reportedly connected to disputes over stage time and scheduling. The fight escalated, and Anthony was killed by someone linked to the tour's production team. No major media outlets sensationalized the event. The industry, as Ralph later hinted, preferred silence over scandal. But for those who were there, the impact was seismic. Gunshots had already echoed through previous shows, but this death brought home the truth. New Edition's reunion had turned into a war zone. For Ralph Tresvant, who had already watched his childhood friends self-destruct in public, Anthony's death marked the moment innocence officially died. What was once about harmonies and friendship had mutated into something far more sinister, an ecosystem of drugs, money, and misplaced loyalty. The tragedy of Anthony B. wasn't just that he died, but that his death symbolized how fame attracts danger when love and discipline disappear. In later interviews, those close to the group admitted that by the mid-1990s, New Edition had become less a band and more a business empire, one surrounded by entourages competing for influence, protection, and access. The people around them no longer cared about the music. They cared about control. And Anthony B., caught in the middle of that storm, paid the ultimate price. His death was quietly buried under tour press releases and reunion headlines, but Ralph never forgot. When he spoke decades later about the dark truth behind New Edition, he wasn't only referring to lost money or shattered friendships, he was acknowledging that lives were literally lost in the process. Anthony B.'s story is a haunting footnote to one of R&B's greatest legacies, proof that when fame turns toxic, even those standing in the shadows can become casualties. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, crafting amid chaos. In the storm of betrayal, addiction, and ego that nearly tore New Edition apart, two men stood as anchors of creativity and calm: Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. When Ralph Tresvant at 57 revealed the dark truth behind the group's internal turmoil, he also acknowledged that without Jam and Lewis, New Edition's most mature and defining work, the Heartbreak album, might never have existed. Amid the shouting matches, secret replacements, and broken trust, these two legendary producers managed to craft harmony out of chaos. By 1987, New Edition was fractured. Bobby Brown had been expelled. Ralph Tresvant was contemplating a solo career, and the label, desperate to preserve the brand, quietly brought in Johnny Gill without even telling Ralph. When he arrived at the studio in Minneapolis, the home base of Jam and Lewis, he was stunned to find a stranger already positioned as his replacement. The tension was thick, the silence heavier than any bass line. And yet, instead of letting the bitterness destroy the sessions, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis turned it into creative fuel. Known for shaping the sound of Janet Jackson, Alexander O'Neal and the Time Jam and Lewis were masters at transforming emotional tension into timeless records. They understood that New Edition was no longer a boy band. They were men scarred by the business, unsure of each other, but still bound by the music. In that crucible, they produced Heartbreak 1988, an album that sold over 2 million copies and redefined R&B with hits like Can You Stand the Rain If It Isn't Love and You're Not My Kind of Girl. Inside the studio, Jam and Lewis acted as therapists as much as producers. Ralph, feeling betrayed, would sing takes filled with quiet anger. Johnny the newcomer poured out his soul to prove his worth. The others hovered between pride and resentment. The producers didn't just manage sound, they managed pain. Their approach was disciplined but compassionate, pushing the group to express honesty instead of hostility. Every harmony recorded in that Minneapolis studio was layered with the residue of personal conflict, yet Jam and Lewis sculpted it into something transcendent. When Heartbreak hit the airwaves, critics praised its sophistication. The album bridged the innocence of Candy Girl with the maturity of adult R&B, positioning New Edition alongside artists like Boyz II Men and Babyface in terms of emotional depth. It also laid the groundwork for the solo careers that followed, including Ralph's Sensitivity and Johnny Gill's My. But behind its polished perfection was a miracle: two producers who turned a broken family into a functioning unit long enough to record history. For Ralph Tresvant, looking back decades later, the work of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis symbolized what New Edition could have been: greatness born from discipline, unity forged through artistry rather than contract. While managers and entourages fueled division, Jam and Lewis built connection through music. Their legacy within New Edition is more than just platinum records. It's proof that art can survive even when brotherhood doesn't. In the end, Ralph Tresvant's revelation isn't just a story about music. It's a mirror reflecting the price of fame, brotherhood, and survival in an industry built on exploitation. From betrayal and addiction to resilience and rebirth, the saga of New Edition exposes how success can both unite and destroy. Yet through all the chaos, their legacy still echoes in every beat of R&B history. Were they victims of the system or architects of their own downfall? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more untold truths behind the icons.